Okay, so I'm going to run through a standard system with you, and the way that this works is this is kind of set up like a menu. So over here on the left, I've got various items. Think of this as like your appetizer, your main course, and your dessert. So I'm going to present these various options. You can select what things you like, and as I make selections, you can see as I check little buttons here, the price goes up, and as I uncheck things, the price goes down. So there are some things that when I select them, the software is going to automatically sort of build a worst case scenario and says, hey, don't forget about all these things you might need. So there is a little bit of a roller coaster when it comes to the price. So if I click a box and the price doubles, don't have a heart attack yet. Let me customize it to your specific house, and then you can have a heart attack. So to get started, there's some basic notes here that are really just for your builder about having adequate ventilation for the equipment rack, and we need stable power at the job site, and don't use carpet in the room where we're going to put the equipment rack. We can go over those things later. There's not really any real decisions to be made in regard to that. Those are just items that we try to make sure the builder's got covered. The first main item on the list is the main system processor. So this is going to be the brain that tells everything in the house what to do. So when you press a button on your iPhone, or you press a button on a remote control, or you press a button on a touch panel, or even a light switch, it's going to send a signal to the brain, and then the brain is going to tell everybody else in the house what to do, whether that's telling the TV to turn on, the shades to go up, the temperature to go down, the volume of the speaker, all those things. There's different sizes of brains, but this is mostly the common size brain. This covers anything from like a 3,000 square foot house to a 20,000 square foot house. Now, if you're going to have an extremely large system with multiple racks and massive number of lighting loads and stuff, we might use a bigger one, but it's double, triple the price. That's not necessary. And then there is one that's less expensive. That's really intended for like one room. So if we were doing an apartment or a high rise that we were just doing like a family room and that's it, then you would use that. But that's not going to have enough ports to control all the things in your house. Comes with a little battery backup for $189. That's something where if we end up selecting a whole system battery backup at the end, then we won't need that part and I can delete it. But for now, we're going to keep that in there as sort of a little power supply for the brain. Next item on the list is the equipment rack. So depending on what size system you end up with, we might need a larger rack or a smaller rack or multiple racks. I think for the size house that you're in, which is about 6,000 square feet, a 42U rack is going to be sufficient to house all of the equipment. And remember, in a modern home, we don't have a bunch of equipment and junk underneath the TV. All of that goes in this equipment rack in that closet upstairs, so you don't have to deal with it. We might come back and select a slightly less expensive rack if I can fit everything into it, but I need to wait until we get to the end to sort of see what your final selections are, so that I know both from a size perspective and also a weight load perspective if that's a viable option for us or not. Yeah. There are some additional optional items here, such as adding a front door, a back door, side panels to the rack. Because yours is in a closet where we can lock the door, unless you feel that's necessary or you want to show off how cool your rack is, I don't think we're going to need those right now. And because you have a newer house where we're building in the ventilation, which is one of these disclaimers up here, I don't think we need the extra components, and that's going to save us about $1,500 by not having to utilize those options. All right, last but not least is the remote serviceability components. This is not necessary for your system to work, but what this does is, let's say that you've got a cable box that you're watching and it freezes up. Well, today, if your cable box is under your TV, you can just go and hold down the power button for 10 seconds or pull the power cord out to reboot it. Not that that's not painful enough, but it's doable. Well, once you have an equipment rack where you've got, $50,000 worth of stuff in your rack, all of those wires are wire managed, and so there's going to be 25 power cords on the back, and it's not going to be easy to just go unplug something. And we don't want the homeowners messing with the rack anyways, because then you're going to generate a service ticket. Yeah. So what we do instead is we have these special outlets where if you ever have an issue, you can call our 24/7, 365 service department and say, hey, I've got an issue, my cable box froze up, and they can get your permission to remotely reboot that for you so that you don't have to pay a service ticket for somebody to come to your house and do it. Okay. That keeps the system reliable because nobody's messing with the wires. and that makes it to where we can help you get back on your feet without having to roll a van. So it gives us gives us faster access to your house to be able to help you out. So that's about $1,200. Is that something you're interested in, or do you want to think about that a little bit later?
Might as well put it on there for right now.
Okay.
Yeah, 'cause I'll make sure things will be secure.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if we end up going over budget, whatever that budget is you want to set for your system, we can always come back and uncheck the box if we need to. All right, so that takes care of the rack and the brain. That's there's one last component to sort of what I refer to as the core of the system, and that's the internet. So if the central processor was the brain, then the internet would be sort of the spinal cord. It's how the brain gets the signal out to the arms and the legs and the lungs and everything else. So whenever we look at the network infrastructure, this becomes very important. Typically in a house, you might get Comcast or Uverse or somebody to hook up a modem, and it's got a little wireless signal coming out, and sometimes it's terrible and sometimes it's really terrible. We do away with all that. So we get them to give you a modem, and that just delivers the internet to your system, and that's where their responsibility ends. What we do is we include a business grade or higher router, network switch, and wireless access points, and that's what's going to take on the load of the automation system and all the technology in the house, as well as distribute that signal wirelessly throughout the home. Now, we don't have to make final decisions yet, but we do know that we need a router and a network switch at a minimum. We might need more than one network switch, again, depending on your later selections. And we'll select what areas we want to add access points at the very end. But by including this, we're basically covering the entire core system. So all in right now, we're at about $8,000, and that's including the brain, the rack to hold all the equipment, the remote serviceability component, and the network infrastructure in terms of the router and the network switch that's going to allow those signals to communicate back and forth between the brain and the rest of the parts.
So basically standard box components.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
So right now we're seeing the foundation for it.
100%. So we've laid the foundation. Now we get to the fun stuff, all the preferential selections you get to make.
Also, I don't mind if the WAPs need to be what they need to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You know, like sometimes the other clients want to put them in areas where they're unseen, but then messes up with the whole.
Exactly. So if you put a wireless access point on the ceiling where it's engineered to be placed, a lot of people worry about the aesthetics, but I always trick people and I say, without looking up, tell me what all is on the ceiling.
Yeah.
And usually they can't even tell me how many lights, but when they look up there, they realize, oh, there's also a head for a fire sprinkler, and there's some sort of like smoke detector. I didn't even know those are up there.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've looked at the ceiling 5 times in our discussion.
Yeah.
So that's something where you're not going to notice a wireless access point. It's small, it's white, it's round. And if we hide it in a cabinet, then you're going to need twice as many. And if they're, depending on what level you select, if they're $500 each and you need 20 of them instead of 10, that can be a significant difference. Mm-hmm. All right. So moving on to speakers, there are 2 types of speakers that we install in the house. They're the same physical speaker, but they're used for slightly different purposes, is a better way of saying it. So we have 2-channel background music speakers. So this would be like if you're in the study or the kitchen where you're not really watching TV, you just want to hear some music playing. And then we have surround sound speakers. This could be anything from a very basic surround sound system, like in your family room, or it could be a full-blown, theater room or anything in between. The idea there is that whenever you're watching television, the sound from the TV is going to come through the speakers. The reason we want to do that is because anything you watch nowadays is broadcast in a surround sound signal format, which means it has at least 5 discrete channels of information, the most important of which is arguably the center channel, because that's where all of the dialogue comes out. So I don't know if you've ever experienced it before where you're sitting down watching TV and it's at a loud volume, but you can't really hear what people are saying very well, and you keep turning up the volume to try and hear what they're saying, and it keeps getting louder until it's annoying, but you still can't hear what the people are saying very well. That's because that center channel speaker is not properly set up, or it's missing entirely, and that you're not getting the dialogue channel.
Oh, okay.
Happens a lot in master bedrooms, stuff like that.
Gotcha.
So we're going to start with the background music, and then we're going to move into the surround sound. So for the background music, I selected the 4 primary zones, which are the back porch, the dining room, the kitchen, and the master bath. And so those 4 zones with an amplifier that'll power them is about $2,700. There is something I should point out. If you look at the individual price here, that is the price of this pair of speakers. These are $99 speakers. And then here's the price of the amplifier. When you look at the total, though, you say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't add up. That's because we don't like any surprises where you get to the end and we say, oh, and then there's sales tax. So when we look at each option group, which is this sort of blue square here and all the items within it, we itemize the pricing for you so that there's no hidden costs, but then we also show you the sort of final drive-out price that's inclusive of all installation, programming, shipping and freight, and sales tax, as well as the cost of the parts. That way, when you go back to review these, you can look at that and say, okay, for all this stuff to get it all up and running is $2,700.
Gotcha. And that includes the service.
Correct. That includes whatever the standard warranty is with those parts as part of the service package. There were some additional rooms that I thought we might want to add. I found 6 of those rooms. That would be two pairs of speakers in the backyard because it's quite a large area. That would be speakers in the gym, speakers in the library, the master bedroom, and the study. So I didn't know if you wanted to include those or not.
Let's see.
And we don't have to include all of them. We could always include just some and not others, but...
So let's go definitely with both the master bed and the study.
Okay.
Library, no.
Okay.
Gym, yes.
Okay. This could be for like around the pool, and it doesn't have to be the ugly plastic rock speakers that you're used to. They actually make speakers nowadays that look like a little landscaping spotlight for a tree, but instead of there being a light bulb inside, there's a little speaker, and we can actually aim it to get better sound in the backyard.
So what are we basically getting in total? Would it be 2 or 4 backyard speakers in this particular situation?
Great question. So since these are per pair, you'd actually be getting 4 speakers total. And I know that sounds like a lot, but think of it this way. Imagine that you had a very large space, let's say an acre of land and it's a square. If I put 1 speaker at each corner and you stand in the middle, how loud do you have to turn up those speakers to be able to hear it at a normal volume? Fairly loud.
Yeah.
The problem is if somebody's standing next to that speaker, it's too loud. On the other hand, let's say we had that same area, but I put 50 speakers and they're all tiny and they're all at a very low volume, but I spread them evenly across that acre. Well, now, no matter where you walk, the volume is the same and it's not too loud anywhere. So it's the same concept on a smaller scale, is that when we have a large backyard area like you have, if we could just put 1 really loud speaker, but it'd be too loud in one area and not loud enough on the opposite area. And so what we've done is we've said, let's evenly distribute the audio so that no matter where you are in the backyard, you get good sound at a high quality, but you can listen to it at a lower volume and still hear it without blasting the neighbors.
Yeah, let's go with those then.
Okay.
2 speakers.
In that case, I'd have one final recommendation. Whenever we purchase the amplifiers, they come in an even number of rooms that they power. So for example, you're not going to find a 3-channel amplifier typically for a background music system.
Yeah.
So what that means is, since we're going ahead with all of the speakers except for the library, you're paying for the expensive part, which is the $2,700 amplifier. You're going to have 1 port or 1 zone left over that's just not being used for anything. For the small incremental cost of $99, we might as well just go ahead and add the speakers in the library. I'm sure you get the use out of them for $100.
Is there anything I can do else with that channel? Not necessarily specifically with the speakers?
No, that's a great question. The background music system is really a standalone system. So while it does work with other elements in the house, it's not like we could use that channel for a surround sound zone or something else. So if we don't end up installing those speakers, it's just kind of wasting one of the channels on the amplifier. Okay, perfect. Last question is what we would like to listen to. And so whenever we look at this, these are our background music sources. And so the idea here is that we've got all these wonderful speakers and we want to choose what to listen to. Typically, I would say if your family uses Apple, which 99% of our families do, AirPlay is very reliable and very easy to use. You can stream music from your Apple laptop or your iPad or your iPhone straight to the speakers in the room or the whole house if you want. Also, if you have guests that have an Android phone, then we can use Sonos, and that is something that we can tie into your background music system. So we can buy one Sonos music streamer, and guests that have Android devices can just use the Sonos app to stream music as well.
No, it's my house. I'm just going to use the app. I'm going to use my phone.
Okay, that sounds good. Perfect.
I don't need my friend Chris coming by and trying to put his Android on my house.
Exactly.
I need that.
We'll lock them out.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. Okay, so we're up to about $18,000 currently. Next are the surround sound zones. So the zones that I selected, which we typically wire for surround sound, are going to be the family room, the kids' game room upstairs, and then the media room or theater room.
Yeah.
Now, what I did for the theater room is I actually bumped it up from a 5-channel to a 7-channel surround sound. The reason for that is because, according to the architect's drawings, you have stadium seating in there, and whenever you have a second row of seating, you basically need a second row of back speakers so that the people in the middle and the people in the back both get the correct audio signals coming to them. Now, we can go above and beyond that. Theater rooms can, you can easily, in this instance, we've got about $3,700 budgeted for the surround sound receiver, the subwoofer, the 7 speakers, and there might be a few other things like a remote control and stuff like that. But the basic package is about $3,700. We have not yet selected a TV or a projector or whatever else. If you want to go, full tilt, I've got a separate proposal where I can talk about theater rooms, and I'll go over that separately. But that can become its own budget. If you say, hey, I really want to design like a movie theater in my house, you can spend $10,000, you can spend $3 million, you can spend everything in between, and we've done theater rooms at all those levels.
To be honest, I'm not really feeling too much about expanding off the theater room.
Okay.
I don't really need all the bells and whistles for that.
Okay,
So
perfect.
just keep it at that.
Excellent.
Whenever that conversation kind of worked out from there.
Awesome. That sounds perfect. Okay. So with that puts us at, let's just call it 28 grand. There's a little bit over. One thing I did want to point out is in each of these 3 surround sound rooms, you're going to have the same things essentially as a surround sound receiver, a set of speakers, and this device right here, which is called a video balun. So the idea here is that the surround sound receiver isn't underneath the TV because that's ugly and it's not reliable and there's all sorts of things that cause issues that way. That was a very 1990s way of doing things. So because all of the equipment is in the rack, there has to be a way to get the video signal from the rack all the way across the house down to the TV. So what happens is, normally when you plug something into a TV, you use a cable called an HDMI cable. That sends the audio and the video from, let's say, your Apple TV or your cable box into the television. Whenever you have surround sound, you just plug it in the surround sound receiver. So that's taken care of because those parts are already up in the rack. The issue then is that the surround sound receiver has an output for the video that needs to go all the way from the rack down to the TV, and an HDMI cable can't reach that long.
Yeah.
The engineering specification on an HDMI cable is typically about 30 feet, and then the signal starts to have problems. So what we do is we use a device called a video balun, and it's actually a pair of 2 different parts, a transmitter and a receiver. What happens is we take the video output from the surround sound receiver and plug it into the transmitting balun, and all it does is really converts an HDMI cable into a Cat6. Then the signal can travel the long distance all the way down to the family room, let's say, and then you have the receiving balun that converts that Cat6 back into an HDMI to plug into the television. That same video balun also sends command signals from the brain to the TV to tell it to turn on and off, to switch inputs, to adjust, volume, picture levels, things of that nature. So you'll see that each one of these surround sound zones has one of those included. All right, so that takes care of all of our background music and our surround sound zones. Now we're going to get to the surveillance cameras. So this is going to be the system that allows you to see, who is in the yard and things of that nature. So I like to show a rendered example of the cameras. So this is one of my favorite actors, and this rendering shows the difference in camera quality types. It's a fairly straightforward example. The challenge is that most people think that the image on the left, the high resolution image, has more pixels, and that's why it looks better. That's actually not true. That's a clever marketing trick that started with cell phone and camera manufacturers. And they say, oh, this is a 900 megapixel, whatever. The reality is that this really blurry, awful picture technically has more pixels than the really crisp clear one. The way you can tell is that if you zoom in on the ring on his finger, you can see on this really clear picture, oh, okay, there's, however many little squares here. Let's say there's 50.
Yeah.
So there's 50 little squares that make up that ring. Well, when I go to a really blurry, awful photo and I zoom in on that ring, you can barely even tell that it's a ring. Look how many squares there are now. Now there's 100. So in reality, this image is from an 8K camera, and this is from a 4K camera. The reason that an image looks better or worse is not because of the number of pixels, it's because of the quality of the glass, the actual lens optics on the front of the camera, and it's the quality of the image processing sensor that's used inside the camera to render the light that's coming through the lens into an actual image.
So process